Day 14. Configuring Umbraco Load Balancer with two Azure Web Apps, Frontend and Backend, by Dhanesh Kumar Muhammad Ansar. One major benefit of Azure App Service is the ability to scale your application based on the load. This article will show you how you can configure an Umbraco website to auto-scale, depending on the server load. We will be deploying a website with two Azure Web Apps, one for the front-end website with auto-scaling enabled, and one for the back-end without auto-scaling. This article collects a lot of different technical setups and will refer to several concepts that we can't go into detail with here. To get the most out of it, it's best to have some Azure tools and web apps experience. We will link to more information where it is relevant. Setting up Azure. The first thing to do is to make sure you've created all the Azure resources and configured them. Follow the steps below to ensure you have created all the necessary items for the auto-scaling environment. 1. Create a web app for the front-end website. Please ensure auto-scaling is enabled. You can see step-by-step instructions for creating an Azure web app in this Microsoft Learning tutorial. 2. Create another web app for the Umbraco backend website. Auto-scaling should not be enabled for this web app, as the backend will not work properly if you enable auto-scale here. 3. Create an Azure SQL database. This database will be shared with the front-end and back-end websites. 4. Create an Azure storage account for the Umbraco media files. Now you are ready to set up the Umbraco media files with Azure Storage. Setting up Umbraco media files with Azure Storage. You can set up Umbraco media files to be stored and served from Azure Blob Storage with the following steps. 1. Open Visual Studio. 2. Install the Umbraco file system providers.azure using the NuGet package. 3. Install Umbraco file system providers.azure.media using the NuGet package. This will be installed on top of the Umbraco file system providers.azure, but all the settings will be maintained. 4. Copy the storage account name and access key from the Azure portal and follow the config update instructions given here in this guide by Jevon. If the settings are done correctly, you'll be able to see the files in Azure Blob when you create a media file in the Umbraco media section. Install SSL certificate for the app service. Now you need to install the SSL certificate so the applications will be secure. 1. Select App Services in the left menu in the Azure portal and click on the relevant app. 2. From the left navigation of your app, select TLS/SSL settings. 3. Click on Private Key Certificates.pfx. 4. Click on Create App Service Managed Certificate. 5. Select the custom domain to create a certificate for it and click on Create. Note that you can only create one certificate for each supported custom domain. The certificate can now be found in the Private Key Certificates list. Setting up Application Insights for monitoring. We recommend installing Application Insights so you can monitor the availability, performance and usage of your web applications. You can also then track live metric streams, requests and response times and events. Read more about this here. Configure CDN endpoints. You then need to set up the CDN endpoints for the media files path to work properly, as media files are now served from the Azure Blob Storage. We recommend following the detailed steps in this guide written by Jevon on GitHub and the Umbraco documentation. Configure the scale-out rules in the Azure Web App. 1. Select App Services in the left menu in the Azure portal and click on the relevant app. 2. From the left navigation of your app, select Scale Out App Service Plan. 3. Set up the two rules as shown in the screenshot below. Staging environment. Setting up your staging environment to be the same as your live environment is ideal for testing, so we recommend you make both load balanced. Repeat all the above steps to set up an identical staging environment. Setting up Azure DevOps. At this point, we highly recommend setting up Azure DevOps so the deployment can be done seamlessly to each environment. You can see the DevOps pipeline workflow we follow below. Azure-specific configuration. It's time to head into the Web.config to make special configurations to prevent several issues. We've compiled the important steps below, but you can read more about this here. Examine directory factory options. To avoid issues with examine indexes becoming locked and corrupt, add the following app settings within Web.config. Frontend website Web.config, add an app setting with the key Umbraco.examine.leucine directory factory. Backend website Web.config, add an app setting with the key Umbraco.examine.leucine directory factory. Once the above configurations are added, then we need to verify that Examine is working. You can check this by using the backend search. If the backend search works, then Examine is working. You can also check the path of the Examine indexes via the Examine dashboard. Configure Umbraco to use the environment temporary folder. To avoid several servers sharing the same temporary files, move any Umbraco temp files to the non-synced environment temp storage. 1. Add the following to app settings within Web.config of the backend web app. 2. Delete the app data temp folder. Umbraco main DOM locking. You want to avoid the publish cache locking when the Azure Web Apps auto-transitions between hosts. This can be done by configuring the web app to use SQL for main DOM locking. Add the following app settings within the Web.config of the backend. Configure an explicit master scheduling server. Umbraco recommends configuring an explicit master scheduling server as it will reduce the amount of complexity performed by the master election process. You can read more about that here. There's 2 ways to achieve this: iServer registrar or editing the Umbraco settings.config file. Option 1. Using iServer registrar. You need to create a couple of classes for the front-end servers and master server. Once the above classes are created, then you need to register them in the backend and the front-end. Backend registration. Front-end registration. Option 2, using Umbraco settings.config. Another option is to set the Umbraco application URL via configuration, rather than using a server registrar. To do this, you need to edit the Umbraco settings.config and add the URL of the web app with the trailing /Umbraco to the Umbraco application URL attribute of the web.routing element. Change the URL https backend azurewebsites.net to the URL of your backend website. Restrict accessing Umbraco backend from the front-end website. Once the 2 web apps are set up, the backend should only be accessed via a single instance. Add the following rule in the web.config to ensure this. Change the URL https backend azurewebsites.net to the URL of your backend website. Custom index and scaling environment. If your application uses custom indexes, then you should use a cache refresher to tell the other servers to also index the data. Add the following event handler to a composer in order to use cache refresher event. Refer to this Examine component source code to understand how cache refresh events can be used. In the handler, remove the custom index items as required, as opposed to using content service publish, for example. Thank you for reading. In this article, we compiled several tutorials and documentations to help you configure load balancer for your Umbraco website with 2 Azure Web Apps. You can read more about load balancing with Umbraco in the Umbraco documentation. We hope you found this article helpful. Should you have any questions, you are always welcome to reach out to us through our website contact form. Happy holidays from Phases.